Welcome to Access Radio. It's another Wednesday, and I'm your host, Amy Amantea. My pronouns are she, her. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. Access Radio is broadcasting to you from the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Peoples. Now, if you happen to be new to Access Radio, well, welcome to Access Radio. This is a broadcast platform where the content is created, it's requested, it's initiated, and it is governed by folks with lived experience of disability. This is important as we honor the disability convention of nothing about us without us. I myself am legally blind, I'm neurodivergent, and I live with chronic illness and chronic pain. But I also feel like I'm really privileged to be able to be the one who can chat with folks from our community and share the stories and the issues that are both relevant and important to our community. I'm also a volunteer, as is Victor Schwartzman, who is our technical producer on this program, and just about everybody else who works with Co-op Radio. So, our stations are back open since the COVID pandemic, but most of us are recording still from home. We find we can bring you high quality content, but also keep it accessible for folks, both myself and other guests. So if you like what you're listening to, and I really hope that you do, perhaps you'll consider making a donation to our volunteer station through the website. And you can find that address at www.coopradio.org, all one word, coopradio.org. And just a big thanks for folks who have made contributions. It's certainly helpful, as there's rent to pay and equipment to update and all that fun stuff. So couldn't have a radio station without all of you. All right, housekeeping hat off, tossed to the corner. Who's in the space with me today? We're bringing back Johnny Tai. Some of you may know him as Johnny Taga. Johnny Tai. Johnny, welcome back to the show. It's been a hot minute since you've been here.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think, 2 years? 3 years?
Yeah,
we survived COVID.
We survived COVID. We certainly did. I don't know how.
Just for the record, she said we record from home, and that's just so you can record while not wearing anything or all that. No one knows. No one really knows. Like Amy sitting there not wearing anything.
That's right. I'm wearing my bathrobe and a pair of fluffy slippers, and I promise you I'm fully clothed. Or am I?
Be comfortable, whatever. No one knows.
Or am I? I'm just kidding.
Let them use their imagination and all that stuff.
Well, even for us blind folks, Johnny, it's like when I hop into a Zoom meeting with anybody, they all have their cameras on, and they're like, "Oh, your camera's not on," and it's like, "So I can't see you. Why should you be able to see me?" Oh, sometimes I can get away with that one, and sometimes not so much. But
well, I do that on my YouTube channel a lot. Like sometimes when I just don't feel like having the camera on me the entire half an hour while I'm talking, I just aim the camera outside at a tree in the backyard, and hey, I don't get to see you guys. You guys don't get to see me either.
That's so interesting, because I was trying to upload something to my YouTube channel, which is woefully underused. I think I have one subscriber, and it's probably me. I was going to say it's my mom, but it's not. It's probably me. So it's something that I'm working on building, so I might have to pick your brain at some point about some special advice for that. However, I just learned, because I was trying to upload a poem that I recorded as audio, that you can't do just audio. It has to be a video file, and I didn't know that.
There is a little gadget on the computer called YouTube uploader. And what it does is it will let you upload audio, and it will generate a random image for your to turn it into a video for you.
Interesting.
Yeah. When we get off air, I can send that to you by email.
I love this. I love this.
Yeah.
I love this.
That's how I used to do my videos before I got comfortable enough with the camera and start to actually do videos.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I could learn a lot from you as an avid YouTuber. Before we go too deep into the rabbit hole, and people are like, "Who is this Johnny Tai person? I didn't catch that episode 2 or 3 years ago." Maybe you can give us a little reminder of who you are, Johnny. Who are you? What's Johnny all about?
Well, that is a difficult
A
one.
loaded question.
That's a really loaded one. I mean, um, well, let's go with my most tried and true, which is I am a totally blind, partially deaf martial arts instructor, based out of Richmond, British Columbia. I founded the Night Strike Self-Defense for the Blind movement, teaching martial art to blind and other disabled folks. I also am assistant chief instructor at the local martial arts studio called Richmond Martial Arts, teaching the combat Krav Maga program. Um, and in addition to that, I have my own podcast. It's called the Johnny Tiger Experience Podcast. I have my own YouTube channel, which you can find me as Johnny Tiger on YouTube, or you can just look on johnnytiger.com. There we'll have my YouTube channel and all that information there, and a short documentary about me you can watch on johnnytiger.com. I used to be a professional musician, leader of the band called The Cat, but now I just publish music under my own name. Well, actually, the stage name I'm using right now is Johnny S.T. Tai. That's Johnny, and then the letter S.T. like Saint, and then Tai, T-A-I. So if you guys want to look that up on Apple Music. But all that is not really why I'm back here today. I'm back here as an artist today. So a lot of people, like I was saying before we started recording, even some of my friends that's been in my life for 20 odd years, they're like, what? You know how to draw? You do sculpture? We didn't know that. I'm like, oh, I mean, my artwork is sitting there right there on the bookshelf. I don't know what you guys were thinking. You guys never paid attention or what, but Anyway.
They probably figured that you purchased it from an artist.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, it is really a small slice of my life that I don't often get to talk to people about in conversation. It's one of those things such as, I play chess, I cook, I collect action figures, and I collect a lot of bladed weapons, but these are not things that just randomly come up in conversation. So,
right.
Unless you really run into that opportunity, most people don't know that I also am an avid art producer, art creator.
So you draw and you do sculpture. So take me back, Johnny. When did you first start to, I don't know, create?
Well, this goes way back. There's a little heartwarming story to it too, because when I was little, I grew up in a very, very violent kind of family. Like my dad was, we grew up in Taiwan. That's where I was before immigrating to Canada at the age of 9. And I know this is going to totally, to people that don't know me, it sounds like something that I make it up, but I literally grew out of a family the kind of family you would see in a mafia movie.
Oh.
The kind of family that, my dad had bodyguards. Honestly, I grew up having bodyguards of my dad driving me to school, picking me up from school afterward, and we had housemaid. We had security gates that you have to go through before getting into our property and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I grew up in that kind of environment. So when I was 3 years old, that was when I lost my eyesight due to a condition called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Because my parents, they were very busy. Well, I mean, to me, they were busy always traveling the world and having fun and stuff like that. But they said they were busy because of business. We'll just trust them on this one.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I hear that one.
So because they were really busy, so they hired a nanny to take care of me She was actually the person that basically raised me as a
Right.
child.
Yeah.
My nanny was a very gentle, very wise lady who used to be a teacher before she became a nanny. And she saw that me and my siblings and other children were always trying to play with, like, toy guns and swords and soldiers and a lot of like really warlike games and stuff like that. And she said she did not want me, especially me being a blind child, she did not want me to grow up with that kind of violent legacy. So I came home from school one day and all my toy guns and swords and soldiers were gone. She threw them all away and replaced them with Lincoln logs and Lego
Yes.
sets and
Yeah.
puzzles and plasticines and clay. And that was her way of trying to steer me onto a more gentle path. And uh, she tells the story of one day she was vacuuming and then she saw me in the corner with my Lego set, and I was 5, almost 6 years old, and she said she saw me build a vacuum cleaner out of the Lego blocks.
Oh.
That And she was amazed that I never even saw a vacuum cleaner with my own eyes, and I could do that just by feeling the vacuum cleaner we had at home. So I guess that was the first inkling any one of us had of me being able to do something like that. Um, so when I was growing up, like as a teenager, went through a lot of other rough stuff. Um, didn't really pay attention in school for a period of time, but the one class I would never skip was art class, because art class was where I was, hate to put it this way, like art class was where I was king. I was like alpha. I took art award every year in school. Like
Mm.
every year, if there's a outstanding achievement for fine art and stuff like that, I took that award home. Um, Mostly work with clay, but a lot of time work with soapstone sculpture, did some wood. But it wasn't until 15 or 16 when I started to draw or do aluminum etching, or I call them tactile drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And that had that basically had an entire different story to itself, how it got started. But yeah, when I first started, it was a lot of clay and soapstone and wood.
Wood. So when you say wood, I mean clay and soapstone. I think you can picture like I don't know, simple tools, polishing cloths, little sort of like exacto knives. But when I think wood, I think of like heavy machinery. Or are you
Not
talking
really.
like
Not
whittling?
really. I mean, no. I mean, even wood. To me, the only difference really with wood sculpture is, you need to be willing to use glue. Actually, in some ways, wood is
Hmm.
easier than uh, clay and soapstone, because you can actually carve two sections of something and then glue them together.
Right.
Yeah, but clay and soapstone, I mean, you can do that too, but it's a lot harder to get them to fit properly, because clay, especially after it dries, a lot of things, the shape or the size change a little bit, and they don't fit. Uh, and soapstone, the material is so powdery, it's really hard to get them to fit back together if you do them in two pieces.
Okay. All right. I'm sort of picturing that in my brain now. Okay. So you do sculpture work, and what kinds of things would you normally sculpt? Like, are you sculpting the human form or animal form or, I don't know, apples? What are you sculpting?
So, um, like I mentioned early on, one of the things a lot of people don't know about me is I'm an avid action figure collector. Right now in my collection, I have just over 1,000 action figures. And this started way back when I was a child, because my my mom, her idea was that if I don't get to see the world, at least she would be able to let me feel what a tiger feel like, what a bear feel like, and stuff like that through getting me action figures and toys. So a lot of my early sculptures were animals and robots and action, like basically using my action figures as model materials. Um, and it wasn't until later on that when I was 16 or 17 that I moved on to actual more realistic human forms. And there's a there's a little funny side story about that one because I still stay in contact with a lot of teachers that taught me when I was in high school. And I remember a few years ago, I went out for dinner with one of my art teacher, who taught me in grade 10. And she, halfway through dinner, she said, there's something I always wanted to know, but back then, when you were in school, it wasn't appropriate for me to ask you. But now that you are an adult, maybe I can ask you this. And I'm like, uh-oh, that sounds really dangerous. And she said, how the hell can a blind person do such good erotic art? She's, and she said, me and a lot of other teachers, we were always wondering that how is this blind guy doing such good anatomies and erotic art? Is he like getting it on with others like more than the rest of us know, or what's going on?
Well, I suppose you have your own body, right? So that's always part of it.
Well, I didn't really do like me. I
You're
did a
doing
lot.
female anatomy, were you?
I did very good female nudes when I was in high school.
All right. Well, is
Yeah.
there some kind of mystery then, Johnny, that
Uh,
you can share on radio?
there actually is because I remember when I was 15, one day I came home from school and I was in a bit of a bad mood, and I told my mom, I said I feel I'm plateauing because I can do very good animals. I can do great mythological stuff like dragons and phoenix and all that, like sphinx. I can do those things, but I have such a hard time doing like realistic human. Like I can do action figure proportion, like superhuman. I can do Superman. That I have no problem. But I have hard time doing something that look like real human because I can't look at real human and get that proportion
Right.
and get that right. So my mom came up with, and like this is actually a little bit embarrassing even talking about it, but my mom came out with this idea. She said, tell you what, you just come shopping with me, and I'm going to leave you by the mannequins in the store, and you just help yourself out. And honestly, the first few times, people thought I was some kind of pervert when I did this. It was really embarrassing. And after a while, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to bring my drawing kit, my
Oh.
modeling clay, and I'm going to set up shop right beside the mannequin. So
Uh-huh.
this way, there's no misassumption. There's no weird assumption that I'm being a pervert, feeling up the mannequin. So, so that's literally how I learned to do really good female and male forms, is through the mannequins in the shopping mall.
Did you ever get any pushback from, like, here I have this vision of like you as a child or a teenager, I suppose, sitting at the bay, feeling up a mannequin and putting that into your clay. Oh, that rhymes, the bay and clay. But like I could, or any of the people in the stores or the department stores, like, hey, you move on.
Yes, I did that. I got that a few times, but luckily my mom was shopping, right? So, usually when that happened, I was like, Yeah, well, we are buying things. It's not like I'm just here wasting time. So, usually people
Right.
are okay after they realize that I was totally blind and I was doing it for artistic reason.
Right. Right. And that your mom is buying stuff in their store.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the biggest, the biggest reason why they let me stay is that my mom was spending money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness for moms then.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think she used that as an excuse to tell my dad she had to go shopping, had to spend a lot of money with.
After they were finished traveling the
I was,
world.
I don't know how much, I don't know how much this whole experience embarrassed her. I know it was really embarrassing for me the first few times.
I can imagine. How old do you think you were?
I was like 15, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
15 years old.
Yep, I can see how that would be a tad embarrassing for a 15-year-old, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's sculpting. How does that relate to the etching?
Well, the etching came about because I had I have an older brother and a younger brother, and both of them were very artistic, not as much as I was, but they what they liked to do when we were teenagers, a lot of times they would read comic book and do they would try to copy the art from the comic book, and they would like sit around and try to draw what they saw in the comic book and do little sketchings and stuff like that. And one time, again, this was when I was 14, 15, and I remember that my brothers, they were sitting at the desk just doodling away and having a lot of fun, and I was bored out of my tree. And so I made a comment. I said, man, it's so unfair. Like, I wish I can draw like you guys. Like, I wish I know how to draw. Now, my older brother, um, he just like turned around. He said, well, why don't you try? So I don't like. What do you mean? Like I can't like if I draw on paper, I can't feel what I'm doing. I don't know. I don't even know what a human head would supposed to feel like on paper on 2D. Like it doesn't make sense. I don't know how you guys do it.
Yeah, right.
So so amazingly, my older brother said, "Here, I'll show you." And he went downstairs and he found a piece of, it wasn't even aluminum. It was like some piece of old metal, really thin metal, uh, from a junk pile or something. And he said, here, and he took one of my action figure. He took a Batman action figure and he drew that. He etched that onto the metal. And he said, okay, here, this is your Batman action figure. And this is what it feels like on a 2D surface. Here is the bicep, here's the arm, and so you can compare it yourself and how it feel like. And if you do what I do, if you use an etching tool or a pen to push uh, the line into a surface like this piece of metal, then you'll be able to feel what you're doing. So that's what opened my eyes, so to speak, in, wow, I can draw. It's a little bit different because I can't work with colors, but I can totally do outlines and shapes and textures and all that stuff. So um, after that, I would try to draw different things, and whenever I don't know how to draw something, I would ask questions, either ask my art teacher or ask my brothers, like, hey, I want to draw a spider, but I'm not quite sure how is that supposed to be on paper. And sometimes I get a good answer. Sometimes, oh, you
Right.
do a circle, and then you do the lines out to the side, like leg, and like that. And sometimes there's no good answer because some people sometimes things. One thing that I learned about art is sometimes people don't draw a nose just because it looks like a nose. Like there's some famous artists that when they draw a nose, it's just two lines forming a 90-degree angle, and people just automatically will assume that's the nose because of where it is on the face.
Right.
So that's something that is a constant learning process. Is sometimes there's no clear-cut answer. You just have to draw something and then see what people interpret when they see it.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. Because here I'm thinking, like when you bring up the spider reference, that you're holding it in your hand to try and figure out what it feels like, because that would just creep the heck out of me. So, but
yeah. I mean, so just think about drawing something like an octopus or a jellyfish.
Yeah,
I mean,
stuff that you don't have either a visual reference for or a tactile reference for.
This is why my favorite thing to draw is things I can pull from mythological or religious icons, where there's really no way to do it wrong. It's all on how you interpret what you're reading. So in those cases, I find I'm less limited by those imaginary boundaries where, if I'm drawing a cat, then I'm constantly worrying about, am I drawing the ears too big?
Right.
What is the pupil of the cat like? Darn it, does a cat have 5 toes or 4 toes? Stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of stuff that can really bog you down if you're not careful when you're trying to do realism.
Yeah, that gets in the way of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you had mentioned earlier about dragons, and I was wondering about what that looks like for you, a dragon, because again, you're talking about pulling stuff from mythology and creatures and all that kind of stuff, which is great, but like something like a dragon is, I would say, culturally, visually identifiable. Does that make sense? I mean, we see them in movies and TV shows and all sorts of things, and they're all fairly similar. So do you feel the same kind of pressure when it's a creature like that?
Well, I mean, there's an interesting thing about dragon is Western dragon and Eastern dragon look very different.
Okay.
Yeah, like when you see dragon in a Chinese context, they look like giant serpents with 8 to 12 legs and horns on their head. But they don't have wings. They still fly. I don't know how, but they don't have wings. It's like dragon magic or something, but they basically
just like snakes swim, but they don't have legs.
Yeah. So I mean, drawing an Asian dragon is very easy. Basically, you start off by drawing a big snake, and then you add the horns, you add the spines on the back, and you add legs underneath, and there you have it. You basically have a very good Oriental dragon. Western dragon, on the other hand, you kind of have to learn how to draw a dinosaur. Like once you learn how to draw a dinosaur, you just add horns and wings, and there you have it. So knowing that, like, dragons were easy for me because of my action figure collection. And I felt a lot of statues of dragons when I was growing up. But something like dragon, it's easy to not get too pressured by realism because no one's ever seen one anyway. So, if you draw one and someone says, dragon doesn't look like that, you can tell them it's an Indian dragon. You can tell them it's a Scandinavian dragon. They don't know.
That is very true, Johnny. That's very true. So how long does it take you to do a typical etching? Or, I mean, while we're bouncing back and forth between etchings and sculpture, I imagine it takes different time to do both things. But how much time do you think you would spend in the process of thinking about it? Because, like, I'm always, as an artist myself, I'm interested in process, right? Like, I'm interested in, do you sit down with your materials to etch or your materials to sculpt, and then inspiration comes to you? Or are you out in the world and you're like, I wonder if I could draw this, and then go and sit down and figure out how to do it?
It happened both ways. I mean, a lot of time I find if I say I'm going to go draw something and I sit down with a piece of aluminum or other materials, we're getting to that later because I have a new kind of art I developed by etching into clear plastic, which is really, really, really interesting visually. But if I say to myself, okay, I haven't drawn anything for a couple of weeks, I need to go draw something, I sit down with a piece of aluminum in front of me. Most likely, most common, what's going to happen is I'm going to sit there for about half an hour and I'm going to get mad and I'll say, "What the hell is it? Nothing's happening." So, I mean, sometimes I
Yeah.
can sit there. Sometimes I'll sit there and I say, I'll be able to think of something to do. But a lot of time, it's just going to be half an hour and then nothing's inspiring me. And then I'll
Yep.
just say, okay, obviously not happening today. Um, you know, uh, I just said this to someone else the other day. I said, I mean, I don't know how PG this is, but it's like an orgasm. You can't force it. It comes when it comes. It happens when it
Hmm.
happens. It's you know,
Yeah.
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 The more you try to force it, the more it's not going to happen.
Well, and the less
Uh,
you enjoy it.
unless you enjoy it, yes. I mean, there are times when I sit down and I just start doodling random lines and then something that happened. Uh, but most of the time, I find my best creation is when I get an idea, like either when I'm reading and a scene in a book make me think, oh, I would love to draw that. Like there was one time not too long ago when I was researching ancient mythology and it came across to me that there was an ancient was an Egyptian goddess that was depicted. She was always sitting on a throne that was carried by two lions. And right away, I was like, I want to draw that. That sounds like something that would be really, really cool to draw. And right away in my head, I'm figuring out dimension of the lion, the throne, the goddess. What would I make the goddess look like, and all that stuff. So, uh, when that happens, then things can happen. Like usually, I will spend the next 3 or 4 days up or maybe a week letting the idea sort of germinate in my head, making sure I have all the angles and uh, shapes figured out and I have a clear picture in my head what I'm aiming for. And then when I sit down, I pick up my etching tool and basically nonstop. And sometimes I can get it done in about 2 hours. Sometimes it might like 2 hours later, I may stop and then put it aside and come back and look at it again tomorrow and see if there's something else that need to be added.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. What's interesting to me about it is I have a similar process as somebody who like creates beaded things. So often I do jewelry, but I also do things like keychains and bookmarks and mask chains, and I do spiders too, beaded spiders. So I too am like, okay, I have all of these beads. However, I can't just sit down with them in front of me and try and create something because it doesn't work that way. I kind of have to be like, oh, like the other day I was thinking about how would I make a dragonfly out of wire and beads. Oh, I think I can make a dragonfly. And then I sat down and I sat there and I tried to figure it out. And sure enough, I was able to figure it out. It took me hours,
Oh,
but
nice.
but it was interesting to me to make it. And now it's like, okay, how do I do a butterfly? Blah blah blah. Right. So I kind
Yeah.
of understand the idea of this process of getting inspiration first and then going to your materials and trying to figure out how you can do it. And sometimes it just doesn't work and I get so frustrated.
Sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just like that's it. I'm gonna put this project away and like I come back to it weeks later. So um yeah, so I totally get that. I'm curious about your like in terms of scope or size, scale, I suppose. Are your sculptures about the size of like an average, like a superhero figurine? Or are they really, really large? Same thing with your etchings. Are they small etchings? Are they larger etchings? Like what kind of scale are you working with?
For sculptures, usually my sculptures are usually a foot to a foot and a half tall and about a foot square, I guess. Like they are not small. They're if you imagine about the size of a Perkins broiler or a small microwave, that's about the size in cubic feet we would be looking at for
Right,
sculptures.
right,
Because I find that if you try to do small, then a lot of times things break easily when you're sculpting, and they end up being more frustrating than anything else. And then if you do too big, then of course displaying and weight and all that stuff become an issue. So you got to take all that into consideration, especially when you're doing it at home. Now, if I'm working in a art studio or art gallery, then where there's no, the room and space is not as much a problem, then I can go a lot larger. I have done 3 foot tall statues before. But if I'm doing it at home, I'm not going to do something that big because it's just too much weight, and without the proper support system, it's just going to crumple, eventually, especially with clay.
right.
Um, yeah. So, as far as drawing, I have drawings here that they're like a postcard size. Um, but those are really, really hard to do because they are so small. And when you're doing etching, it's hard to get details in when it's that small, especially by hand. It's not like I'm doing it by laser printer or something like that. Everything's handmade. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so small size is hard to do. So most of the etchings I prefer to do are about 12 by 12 or 14 by 14. Um, Now, one day, if I ever get the chance to do this in a large scale, I would love to do a life size uh, etching, either a person or an animal. I
Hmm.
think that would be quite amazing, and I think it would be really challenging. And I think part of what I always want and love in creating is to constantly challenge yourself, right? Like you don't want to just do the same old thing over and over again. Sometimes a little bit of challenge it's great.
Yeah. That's how long do you think that would take you to do?
A full human size, I think that would at least take 16 hours. I'm estimating 16 hours. Now, obviously, wouldn't be doing that
I was
continuously.
going to say that's several
Yeah.
sittings.
Yeah, that would I would probably break that up into 3 hour sessions or 2 hour sessions
Yeah.
because one thing I noticed as a artist is when you push yourself too hard and you start to get tired, say you start to get the good enough mindset,
Right.
which is really bad. When you're tired, you think, oh, this is good enough. I don't know. I can't think. I just want to quit. And then next day you come back and look at it like, I don't know what I was thinking. This is crap.
There's a common artist's phrase. I hear it a lot with playwrights, but I think it probably translates maybe to some other things where, when you say to a novelist or a playwright and you say to them, well, how do you know when it's finished? And they say, well, the work is never done. It's just abandoned.
That is
And
very true.
right. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, we put something together and maybe it's not perfect, but you're like, well, this is what this iteration is. And you kind of have to be okay with that. Um,
Yeah, and you also have to be careful you don't over polish something because
right.
if it has flaws, you can always fix it. But if you overdo something, it's very hard to undone it.
I'll tell you that my family, a couple years ago, we went and we did one of those like wine and paint things. I think it was Mother's Day. So there's a group of 7 of us that were doing it, and we were in a local pub, and we had a canvas that was, I don't know, it was like a maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, like a rectangular shape, and it was paint. And so you start by painting the canvas entirely in white, and the teacher is kind of guiding you through it, where he says, okay, now paint the top, like, paint the top left corner in blue, and you get to decide what shade of blue or whatever, but it's going to be your sky, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there going, well, how much of the top corner? Like, that's not enough information for me. Like 2 inches of the top corner, the top fourth of the canvas. Like, what are we talking about here? Because he would say, well, it's up to you. You're the artist. And I'd say, well, like, but you're the teacher. So if I can't understand what the final product is supposed to be, then I'm going to be like, well, that's too little sky or not enough sky, right? Yeah. But at the end of it, so it was supposed to be a painting of a cherry blossom on the side of a mountain with a waterfall, cherry blossom tree. And what was so interesting was as the only person in my group with very little eyesight, everybody else had total 20/20 sight. My painting turned out better than everybody's because they had exactly what you're talking about. They're like, oh, I got to fix this thing on the tree. Oh, the waterfall doesn't look like a waterfall, right? So they kept going back and trying to fix it. And I was just like, nope, this is going to be what it's going to be. Because as soon as I take the brush off the canvas, I can't put it back on in the same spot. Mm-hmm. So I would be painting like a tree beside a tree instead of painting the tree. So, right? Or I'd make a waterfall on beside a waterfall instead of in the waterfall. So as soon as my brush left the canvas, that was the end of whatever it was I was painting. And when my family and I look back at these paintings, they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't overthink it. Right? And everybody else
just went ahead and do it.
That's right. So they kept over adding to their waterfalls, so they looked like big, blue squares on a canvas, and mine had texture and nuance, and it's like, I don't know. How did I do it? I don't know. I just did it.
Yeah, it's really similar to composing music and songs. Like you keep thinking that you should add more, but you got to be careful with that because you end up making it too busy and no one can appreciate it. Sometimes I'm sure you have experience where you listen to recordings from the 60s and 50s and there's crackling noises in the background and it's just one guitar and the microphone sounds crappy, but it sounds great because it's honest. It's not overly polished or embellished.
You kind of feel like you're in the room.
You feel like you're in the room. So with art, a lot of time, it's like that. And, going over to what you said, you take the brush off and you wouldn't be able to put it back in the same spot. I have so many instances because when you're etching, the part that you can actually feel, it's facing down. So, if you want to double check what you're doing,
you gotta turn it upside down.
You gotta flip it over. Which it's a bit of a nuisance when you got to unclip it from the clipboard. Mm-hmm. Flip it over. Be careful not to cut yourself because aluminum is very sharp.
Yeah.
And then figure out where you want to go and then flip it back and then make sure you don't lose the line. Clip it back onto the clipboard and continue. So I've gotten to the point where most of the time I don't need to flip it over. I can just trace the indentation and know where I'm going. But there are still times when I thought I was adding the horn onto the head of the cow, and then I realized that's not the head. It's at the wrong side. Got it? Now what am I going to do with it? So that's when the cow.
You call it a dragon.
Well, that's usually when the cow would turn into like a horse pulling a buggy, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes you do mess up halfway, and you have to. So either are we going to throw this away, or are we going to turn this into something else?
So is it easy to find aluminum sheets to do this kind of etching?
Luckily, you can actually buy that on aluminum sheet on Amazon. Oh. You just look for craft aluminum sheet, and you want them to be the 36 gauges.
Okay.
because anything thinner would be too fragile, and anything too thick would be really hard to take a shape.
Right.
Yeah, so, if anyone want to try their hand on it, get the 36 gauge craft aluminum sheet. Now, most of the time, it comes in a big solid roll, and you have to cut it yourself.
Right.
So I actually bought a paper cutter, so it makes it a little bit easier. But before I bought a paper cutter, I did it by hand, and then I got a lot of complaints about the etchings had jagged edges and the edges were uneven. Like, look, I'm doing this blind. What the heck do you guys want?
Yeah. Well, when you sell them, do you put them in frames or are you just selling them as is?
Well, one thing that I'm going to be working towards is right now we're building a website to allow people to see the artwork and buy them directly from the website.
Yep.
And we are going to leave it open to people. So would you like to have it framed or would you like just the picture itself? And
Yeah.
you want to frame it yourself. And if you don't want the frame, then we can give you a $50 discount.
Right.
Because I know a lot of people like it better when it's framed, but there's also a lot of art collectors that like to have the frame of their choice and do it themselves.
Right.
So I think we'll leave that up to people how they like it. But at live shows and events, mostly we'll have framed work there, just partly for presentation and also partly so people don't cut themselves.
Right. Or you don't cut yourself even in just transporting the stuff.
Yeah, transporting them is a completely different art all unto its own because, when you're doing etched drawing, the last thing you want is for them to get squished.
Yeah.
Aluminum holds the lines really good, but there are still, the aluminum get bent and warped very easily during transportation, so you got to be very careful with that.
And of course, if you're transporting stuff in frames, it gets heavy and it's all fragile and yeah.
Fragile and then there's a cost. You got to figure, like, right now it's really hard to get a good frame under $50.
Yeah.
So, if every piece of art you want to frame and put $50 into the frame itself, then you got to sell for quite a bit of money to recoup that cost.
Yeah, maybe you got to look at buying frames from like the dollar store or like a Walmart where they're $5 a frame, and then somebody can upgrade that frame because they didn't spend a lot on the frame, right?
Yeah, actually, one of my art teachers suggested, why don't I, rather than framing them, try to do this other more new age way of tacking them onto a piece of wood or some other surfaces and sell them that way.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
That's definitely something that I would be thinking about further down the road because one thing that bugs me about the frame is it's great for sighted people to appreciate my work, but then people who are blind can't feel them.
Can't feel it.
And
the glass.
the whole point is tactile art.
Yeah.
So it's ironic when you do tactile art and it's hidden behind glass.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could put it in like on something that would be like a stretched canvas over wood, and then use what do they call it? Like those nail head things that they use, those like upholstery tacks, and tack it down around the perimeter.
Down that way.
Yeah. That could be really interesting.
It will look a little bit less fancy than a framed etching, but I mean, no, it's definitely something that I'm open to thinking about. Because one thing that I put a lot of work into on the tactile drawing is because we are not working with any colors, so I put a lot of work into using different textures to make things come through as like for example, like if you're drawing a person wearing a pair of jeans, if you can't if you're not working with color, you can't do the blue denim look, then you need to at least be able to get the jean texture to come through, which
So what,
is quite challenging.
so what are you using? What kind of tools are you using to make these different textures?
Um, for the longest time, I basically put together a little tool set myself with a roller style pen, fountain pen, roller style fountain pen, and one of those old Braille stylus, and
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of other uh, like little things you can find in the knitting store, like different needles, different stoppers to get different shapes. But as of last year, my girlfriend actually bought me a complete tactile drawing set from the American Printing House for the Blind, which
Huh.
cost cost like $700 US.
Oh my gosh. What
Yeah,
a
I
gift.
know it was, but ever since then it made things a lot easier because I'm no longer working with cobbled together tool, and now I have things that are actually made for circles and things that are actually made for squares. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so things become a lot more streamlined. But for people who don't want to spend that kind of money, it is perfectly doable to just put together a set of stuff yourself. Just the first thing you need is a good solid pen, because you can't use a regular pen because a lot of times there's a lot of force you're putting on the pen. So you need a pen that has a steel or aluminum body that you're not going to break it. Um, and then you need some kind of carving wheel or drawing wheel that you can uh, do more three-dimensional kind of line and etching, and hopefully like something circular to guide you when you need to draw a circle and stuff like that. So yeah, like just when you look around, you can find all kinds of household stuff that you can put into your drawing and etching kit that can give you really interesting results. One of the things I did was, for example, I took the meat mallet I have in the kitchen,
Ah,
and
yes.
whenever I need a rocky outcrop, a rocky background, then
Yeah.
I take the meat mallet and just gently tap over the part of the etching that I need that rocky texture.
Yeah, that's cool. I imagine too you could be creative and have things like cookie cutters. Because cookie
Yeah.
cutters are all sorts of like geometric type shapes and different,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
trace around the outside of them or around the inside of them with your pen
Yeah.
and make shapes.
Yeah, or you can get all kind of like magnets or puzzles from the dollar store that can give you interesting outlines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. I had never really thought about this kind of etching before. And so now we've gone and chatted almost a whole hour, Johnny, but you were talking about this new form that you've created. Do you want to touch on that?
So this one totally I came by this by accident because I went through many years of not producing anything
Mm-hmm.
art-wise, because focusing on martial arts and work and music and all that other stuff. I think there's only so much creative energy I could spend. So a couple of years ago, I started to, think, oh, if I want to give someone a very special Christmas gift, why don't I draw something for them?
Yeah.
So I bought some aluminum sheets and sort of dusted off my skill and started giving people Christmas gift of my drawing. And one time, I had 6 people I was drawing for, and I ran out of aluminum sheet. And so I thought, oh, darn it, like it's almost Christmas. It's not enough time for me to order more. So what I did was I found a clear piece of plastic that I ripped off of like a pie box. When you buy those pie from the bakery in the store, they come in a box that have a clear front. the clear
Oh,
plastic.
yeah. That like
Yeah,
thin, like vellum clear
yeah,
acrylic stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I took that off the box and I drew on that. I thought that's pretty cool. It's still raised line, and I can still feel it. So I thought it would be totally the same as aluminum. Well, next day, my friend called me and he said, "Dude, this is really cool." I said, "What, the plastic?" He said, "Yeah, yeah. Did you know what you did?" I said, "No, I just etched it like the aluminum stuff. What's different about it?" He said, "When I first got it, because it's a clear plastic, so it didn't look like it had anything on it, but I could feel the line. So what I did was I held it up against the wall and shined my flashlight on it, and it projects your entire picture onto the wall." And I was like, "Wow, that is really, really cool." So right now I'm calling this new style of etching the shadow art, because you need to use the wall and the flashlight to get the
Yeah.
shadow of the picture. But for someone who is blind, it's mostly the same. It will feel mostly the same as the aluminum etching. But for the sighted people out there, this is something that a lot of people find very, very pleasing, because you are interacting with the picture, and you can see the picture being projected onto the wall from a piece of plastic that doesn't look like it has anything on it.
So where are you getting your plastic today, or are you just continuing to upcycle?
Actually, most of my clear plastic come from action figure boxes. So now, whenever I buy a new action figure, I recycle the clear plastic from the window front of the box.
And here I'm thinking that you're one of those people who doesn't take the action figures out of the box. Because doesn't
I
that
mean,
devalue
as
them?
a
Because then you can't play with them.
as a blind person, it would be a little bit
It's a waste.
counterproductive to keep them in the box.
Of course.
I, I
Of
would.
course.
I mean, what if someone just sold me an empty box? I wouldn't know.
That's hilarious. I didn't even think about that. Here you go, sir. Here's a $35 empty box for you.
$35 Batman, and nothing
Oh,
in it, but he's blind. He wouldn't know.
blind, you wouldn't know. This is super interesting stuff, Johnny. I'm really glad that I had a chance to chat with you about it. I would never have known that you were like this deep into art. Do you want to share your not your websites and stuff? You shared it at the beginning, but if folks are like, "Oh my gosh, that was so fast! I wasn't prepared for that." Maybe you might want to share it again, so that's
Yeah,
people can
it's
copy
very
that down.
simple. JohnnyTiger.com. That's JohnnyTiger.com. Uh, the artworks are not on there yet, but we are estimating we should get the website portion for the artwork finished in a couple of months. Then people would be able to go there and view them and buy them and all that fun stuff. And what I'll also be doing is include little blurbs and background stories with